Welcome to the Startup Grind.
So thank you once again for being here, and I am excited to announce Zhuo, who is the managing partner at Karlin Ventures. And I want to also stress that he's here on his own time so that we can learn.
I was getting paid for this. I just sent you
We'll
my
talk
invoice.
about that later. So he's here on his own time so that we can learn from his story. So I want everyone to get out of your seats and give a round of applause for TX.
Thanks for having me, Joe. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you so much. So normally we like to start these by hearing a bit about your background. So tell us about where you grew up and what you wanted to be when you were a kid.
Got it. So I grew up in Singapore, which is a small country out in Southeast Asia. I would call it the Switzerland of Southeast Asia. So it's a financial capital of the world. When I was young, I actually wanted to be a car salesman. So I think it started when I was 12. So I actually had a short internship working for a Toyota dealership. And I think people who I work with right now, our team in the back, will actually attest to this. So my hobby on the weekends was actually looking up car magazines and trying to memorize all the statistics of every single car at the back of every magazine. So I would say I have an affinity for numbers.
I would say so. So how early was that still a realistic dream?
Even right now, I mean,
yeah?
if I could make a living, I would do it. Yeah.
Okay, I feel like you could make a living. Would you have one car in particular that you would sell?
No, I mean, I just like doing it.
You'd be like a CarMax guy.
I'd be like
right?
a CarMax. Right? I like new cars, so maybe not quite CarMax.
Okay. So what did your parents do? What was your childhood like?
So I actually grew up in a pretty privileged family. So my dad used to work for my grandpa. So my grandfather, I think it's the entrepreneurial blood in us. He started one of the first few companies in Singapore that became the National Bus Service. So my dad worked for him. They were a real estate development company, and my mom worked for the Australian Embassy in Singapore. So never had to worry about anything. So I was pretty lucky till about I was 16.
Okay, and then what happened when you were 16?
I was 16. So I think it's a story for another day. But long story short, my grandfather had two wives, and there was a huge dispute over his family, his wealth. So my dad and his side of the family drew the short stick. So from being a pretty affluent family, we were basically almost on the streets. So my dad got kicked out of my grandfather's company, had to find a job on his own. And I think at that point, all along, I've always dreamt of coming here to the US for college. And that was kind of my dream ever since I was 12 or 13. I think it started from the TV shows I saw on TV. I think it was Friends, which was the first one I got hooked on. But then I think it was this realization at 16 that my dream would be in jeopardy, that I might not be able to actually make it here. And I think it started off with a lot of resentment. I think first started with the world, like why did my world come crashing down all of a sudden? Why did everything take a turn for worse? So I think that was the first realization. So after graduating from high school, what happens in Singapore, you actually go through the military for 2 years. And I was like, okay, I was so optimistic. I was like, okay, this 2 years, I'll save as much money as I can, and hopefully I can pay for college. So I was very fortunate. I applied for colleges before I enrolled in military, and I got accepted by Brown University. And I was like, oh shit, I really want to go there. I just couldn't save enough money by the end of it. So at that point, things were looking pretty bleak.
So was this was when you were around 18?
Yeah, this was around 18. So I was in the military till I was 19 and a half.
Okay, and then during the latter part of your time in the military, what was your next move?
Sure. So I applied to every single scholarship I could find. So I was like reading the newspapers, calling people. I think I looked at the visitor log. So they had I would say a college guidance center back in Singapore. So actually it was a free service set up by the US Embassy to actually guide students on what colleges you apply to. So I think this was back in the year 1999 or 2000. I think I went there a total of like 250 times that year. So I applied for every single scholarship I could find. I was very fortunate that I found a scholarship to Wesleyan University. So It was a scholarship funded by AIG, the insurance group. It was a bond-free scholarship. All you had to do was attend Wesleyan because the founder of AIG went to Wesleyan University and he wanted to give back. So I thought, oh, this is great, right? Things are looking good right now, and I think that was probably within those years one of the happiest moments in my life when I got that scholarship.
And then you went straight to Wesleyan?
I went straight to Wesleyan, packed my bags, took a 32-hour flight actually. So I stopped over, I think it was from Singapore to Tokyo, Tokyo to Chicago, Chicago to Bradley Airport. Anyone who's been to Connecticut, that's probably the worst airport ever. And coming from a big city was so strange, right? Because I stepped out the airport, all I could see was grass. And back in Singapore, all I saw was concrete buildings, 10-story buildings. I was like, oh my gosh, when am I ever going to get there? So I think after a total of 36 hours, including the wait time at the airport, I finally arrived in my dorm room.
And so, you didn't know anyone at Wesleyan, right? You were completely on your own.
Yeah.
And what did you study?
So I was like, this is I always wanted to go into some kind of business or finance role, and I think my top choice would have been to enroll in a business program, but I didn't have that there at Wesleyan. So the closest substitute I could find was a math and economics degree, and I thought that kind of played to my strengths, so that's what I majored in.
Because Wesleyan's liberal arts school,
yeah.
Correct? Okay. And so to walk us through your first year or 2 years at college, what was that like being in America and being a student?
Got it. So I think the first year was eye-opening. So if anyone has been to Wesleyan, it's one of the most liberal colleges. I don't mean just by education, but just everything itself.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very eye-opening. Me coming from a very conservative background and family, I think sort of the experiences I had were very different. For example, I think it still exists. One of the dorms at Wesleyan was called the naked dorm. So people would walk around without clothes, which I thought was totally absurd. But as a 19-year-old, it wasn't that bad.
So how long did math and econ alone keep you busy? Did you have some extracurriculars you started getting interested in?
I did. So I think I forgot to mention this. So back in Singapore, I don't think the sport is that popular here. I used to play badminton, and at one point in my life, when I was about 40 pounds lighter, I was actually pretty good. So I actually played on the national junior circuit. So I think my best was I was ranked 7th in Singapore. That's when I was really good at it.
That's number 1 in the U.S. probably.
That's what I thought. So I think I competed in the 2002 Boston Open and made it to the quarterfinals at Wesleyan. So I thought I should have won, but that's a whole nother story. So life was good freshman year. Lots of new experiences, made a lot of friends who I'm still close to this very day. Then I think sometime in 2002, after my sophomore year, I think that was sort of a pivotal point in my life. So I got a phone call from my mom saying that you have to come home right away. So it's like, what's happening? I think this was just right after spring break, and I was like, I can't leave, I have school. She said, you have to come home. So took a flight home, found out that my dad was terminally ill. So he had 6 months to live, and at that point I was like, I need to take a leave of absence, right? My dad was one of my closest friends till this day. I think one of my biggest regrets of coming to college, which is not being able to spend the last few years with my dad. So fast forward 6 months, I quit school, was back home in Singapore, trying everything we could to save him. So paying the best doctors, buying the best medicine, nothing worked. So after 6 months, he passed away from lung cancer. So. And what made it worse was at that point I couldn't really go back to school. My mom suffered from depression for the next couple of months. Couldn't really go back to a job. And the creditors were calling me every single day, trying to take my house away from my mom. And I knew how much the house meant to her, and I couldn't let that happen. So that's sort of a segue to how I became an entrepreneur. So I describe myself as the guy who never wanted to be an entrepreneur but was forced to do it. So this was me thinking back to what I could do. So I needed to make money like yesterday. I needed money in a bank account. And what I did, I thought back to my freshman year. What happened when I first got to school was that my mom actually shipped me a box of textbooks because textbooks were a lot cheaper back in Asia. And I thought maybe I could actually start a business selling textbooks. So I was like, okay, I have to go back to Connecticut anyway to renew my student visa, so why not make a trip back? And I'm in the middle of Middletown, Connecticut, which is the waspiest place in America. So I was like, if I pitch some of my professors and pitch some of my friends, maybe I could get a couple $1 million and get the business started. But I actually walked around my backpack, pitched 70 different people, professors included, and no one would write me a check. So here I was, with no money in the bank and no one willing to write me a check. So this is like the worst situation ever. So what have I thought about it?
And let me pause you there. When is this? You're 20 years old now?
Yeah, I'm 20.
20, and this is your beginning of your junior year?
I'm 21 at this point.
Okay.
So I could buy alcohol, but...
Okay. But you'd need to raise money first.
Yeah. I couldn't afford it. Could buy it, but couldn't afford it. So what happened, I was like, I need to sell textbooks. How am I going to make this happen? So I thought about it long and hard. So at that point, I was like, okay, I have a great idea. So I thought about it. The way eBay and Amazon and Half.com, if any of you have sold on their platforms, they actually take all the sales you made over 2 weeks and pay you out, minus any refunds or chargebacks that you might have. So I got about, I would say 95 to 100 of friends who I was close to say, hey, could you open 300 eBay accounts for me? They're like, why the hell do you want 300 eBay accounts? So I got every one of them to buy a textbook from me, and that sort of bankrolled the business. So they all took a huge leap of faith where they bought a textbook from me, put it on their credit card, and I said, please cancel the transaction or just ask for a refund on the 29th day. So what happened on day 15 was that I got the most money I ever had in my bank account. I think I had $25,000. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Part of me wanted to spend it all, but obviously I didn't. So I actually took that money and started the business. So we started buying textbooks from India. And then as the business grew, we actually set up a warehouse in India. So that the next couple of years was me shuttling back and forth India, Singapore, and the US trying to run the business.
So I feel like this is really an interesting place to kind of dive a little bit deeper, because not only were you 21 and you tried to raise money from 70 people and they all said no, but you kept going,
yep.
Right? What was it about this experience, besides the fact that you didn't have a choice, that made you run through the wall and keep trying new things? Did you have a mentor or a co-founder, or what kept pushing you?
I had a co-founder, which was great. So I think highly recommend that if you ever start a business, have a co-founder, because it's a very, very lonely journey. I think one thing that I wish I had was a formal mentor. I think the closest person I can think of who gave me my next job was a gentleman by the name of Ron Daniels. So Ron Daniels ran the global practice for McKinsey back in the 80s to the late 90s, and he was a fellow Wesleyan alum. So I think the very first year, I think they saw me as a promising student. I don't know why. So they gave me this small scholarship. So part of the scholarship involved having a mentor who was a successful Wesleyan alum who I would speak to on a monthly basis. So Ron Daniels would call me, and then especially when I decided to quit school, he was like, hey, I really need to speak to you. This is the dumbest move you could ever make. So he was like, I told him that I had to do it, and he was like, whatever. So we used to touch base. We would catch up every month or so, and then he was like, young man, I don't think your business is that viable. And then I think in 2005, when we had our first $1 million month, he was like, I actually want part of this business now. So he became a formal advisor to the business, and then I think we can talk about it a bit later, but he was the one who sort of walked me through the process for my next job.
So besides not having cash with the initial company, what were some big problems that you had to solve along the way to scale?
Got it. So I think a huge part is that we weren't logistics experts, right? So we could never quite figure out shipping. To give you a reference, the textbooks will cost us about $10 to $12 a book in India, but to ship them to the US will cost $22. And all our competitors were using DHL, UPS, FedEx to ship the books, and we're like, shit, how are we going to ever beat them on margins? Because we're making at that point $1 to $2 a book, and that was clearly not scalable. So my co-founder and I still take full credit for it, by the way. So we came up with this strategy where we actually started printing a USPS label from the textbooks back in India. So each book was pre-packed, had a USPS label on it, and then we would ship them in bulk to 4 different post offices in the US where they could actually crack it open. And those 4 post offices were strategic because no single address within the US would be more than 2 zones apart from those post offices. So they could actually crack the box open and ship the books out. So that reduced our shipping cost from $22 to about, I think, $11.50 a book. So that was our margin. So I was creating money for myself.
So I don't think that just happens, right?
Yeah.
Talk to us about did you make some mistakes before you found those 4 zones?
We did. So we did all kinds of silly stuff. I mean, we shipped all the books to the US. We actually lost a shipment. So there's one point we lost like $15,000 of textbooks and we were going to cry. I actually went to the port in Connecticut. It's pretty near Mystic Seaport, if any one of you is from there. And tried to fight with the custom officials to actually release a batch of textbooks, but they never did. So I lost $15,000, and that's like one of the rare days that I actually cried.
Other than, and maybe this was the lowest moment, but before you really started to build momentum, were there times when you thought about closing the business down, or were maybe thinking like Ron said that it wasn't viable?
I did. I really didn't have a choice at that time. That was like the only way I knew how to make money. So I was working like, I kid you not, probably 95-hour weeks, week in, week out, just to pay the bills and just to get the creditors off my mom's back. So I really didn't think that there was an alternative. So it was kind of do or die. So it's kind of strange. The one interesting thing, I think this was when the business was slightly more successful, that we actually had a customer service team, and I was the most junior guy on the team and the most senior guy all in one. So it's funny, we tried all ways to sort of improve customer service. So one big hit on the business was returns. So when we first started the business, we had about 12% return. So people would switch classes, or people like, hey, you know what, my mom actually got the book for me from the bookstore. Couldn't quite figure out. We tried all kinds of schemes. Hey, can we give you a $5 discount to keep the book? Some of it worked, some of it didn't. The biggest thing that worked was I used to reply to every single email using my name. So I switched to female Caucasian name, and then that reduced returns from 12 to 7%. So that was the best thing I ever did.
Oh my goodness. Wow. I'm not surprised you'd be a good car salesman.
Yeah. I guess if I sent
Linda.
if I sent the photo of myself, maybe that would have been different, but I didn't think about it.
Yeah. So how many years did you run the business?
I ran it for about 3.5 years. So we sold the business in late 2006.
Okay. Talk to us through the acquisition, because
Sure.
late 2006, you're 26 years old, is that right? You're 26, and you get an acquisition offer.
Yeah.
Was there a lot of negotiation, or?
So the people who actually acquired us were our 3PL providers back in India. So it's a company called LBE. They actually support. They are actually a logistics business that supports a lot of companies that ship stuff out of India. So I think they're if you look at the exit signs, I remember they had a business that they bought which supplies all these signs around the world. So we were approached by sort of one of the managers of that business, say, hey, we've been tracking you. Based on our estimations, you guys do X in revenue. I was like, that's pretty close. So what does that mean? They're like, you guys are young. I think you guys could do with a bit of money. I was like, hell yeah. Why don't you guys come in and have a chat with us to see what we can actually do? So my co-founder and I had this elaborate plan where we had this whole role-playing exercise, 2 hours back and forth. Okay, we're going to take this price. We're not going to take that price. And then when we stepped in the room, they made their first offer, and both of us said yes at the same time.
And so this is 2006. You
Yep.
successfully exited a company, and had you already finished school at this
No,
point?
I went back to school.
Okay. So you went back and you had 1 more year to go?
I had a year and a half. So I graduated like sort of winter 2007.
All right. And you were math and econ double major?
Yeah.
Wow, double major still with, I guess, over 7 years.
Yeah, I became pretty good though.
Yeah. So, right when you're done with school, what were your career paths? I mean, what had you thought about doing at that point?
I wanted to be on the beach for about 3 months, but fortunately Ron Daniel didn't allow that to happen. So he was like, why don't you come work for McKinsey? And I was like, hey, maybe this is a good way for me to take a vacation on McKinsey's expense account. So he asked me like, okay, you can go to any office in the world. Where would you go? So I was like, I kind of want to go to London. So I went through the sort of a shortened interview process. He made that happen, and early '08 there I was working for McKinsey.
And then you were at McKinsey for 2 years. Is that
I was
right?
there for like 2 years and 4 months.
Okay. And so for those of us that don't know, I'm sure most of us do, what is McKinsey and what was your role?
It's a high-class sweatshop where everyone wears suits.
That sounds about
Yeah,
right.
so it's a management consulting firm where we actually help a lot of Fortune 500 companies make decisions. I think most of the time they already know the decisions that they want to make, and we're just there sort of to be the bad cops and deliver the message. So that's how I would describe it.
And then what were, at 26, you've obviously had experience in your own business. What did you learn from, your own venture that you were able to apply at McKinsey?
So I came in with a very different mindset, right? Like a lot of my coworkers I'm still pretty close friends with. A lot of them actually started great companies. For example, I don't know if you guys have heard of Class Dojo in the education space, a huge company. That was the guy who sat next to me at McKinsey. But a lot of them came in with sort of lofty career aspirations. A lot of them say, hey, I want to make partner at McKinsey. I want to be the youngest partner in the office, or I want to be the youngest manager. I didn't really care about any of that. All I wanted to do was learn as much as I could from the process. I mean, I'm not kidding. I call myself a first-time entrepreneur, but hack job businessman. So when I first started my company, all my Excel sheets were hard-coded, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. I couldn't even build a presentation. So I wanted to pick up just sort of very basic business skills when I was at McKinsey, and through my business, I think the way I interacted with most people was electronically. So I actually never really dealt with a lot of people while I was running my business. I felt I was locked in a room and never had a conversation with a proper person. So I think McKinsey was a good time for me sort of to improve my social skills.
Did McKinsey also show you, maybe expose some of your weaknesses that you didn't recognize before?
It did. I'm terrible with hierarchy. I hate it. I can't deal with it. I'm not good with a lot of structure as well. So I think McKinsey was very interesting because the first sort of year and a half I was learning all the skills I needed, was meeting some great people, but sort of I think at the 18 or 19 month mark I realized that this is not for me. I can't stay there anymore. So I really needed to get out.
So what was your next move?
At that time I sort of went with the flow. I was like, hey, let me apply to business school. Everyone was doing it, and I kind of said, hey, why not? I should try. So I applied to a couple of schools here in the US. I knew I wanted to come back here, and fortunately got accepted to business school and then made the trip out. So tendered my resignation and then headed out probably about April 2010.
And then you went where for business school?
I went to Stanford for business school,
Okay.
and that sort of it's a great segue to the next story. So I was very lucky when I was going to business school. Eric Schmidt, who runs Google, was the guy who gave me my acceptance letter. So he's the guy who picked up the phone, called me, say, I actually teach at Stanford. We're actually going to admit you into school. So had a conversation with him. I was like, oh, this is great. And then he asked me about my life aspirations. I started as an entrepreneur. Wasn't a very successful one, had a very modest exit, but sort of want to get back into the tech space. So he was like, hey, this is great. Let me introduce you to a guy I just gave money to start a new venture fund, and maybe you can start working for him. Innovation Endeavors is a seed fund based in Palo Alto. And then the partner I worked for was a gentleman by the name of Zhuo.
And what did you do there?
So I was.
This is while you're at business school.
This is
as well,
out of business
right?
school.
Okay.
So I was working like 30 hour weeks. I was the sort of only associate there. So anything from doing diligence on deals, running financial models, which I could build at that time, and also looking for entrepreneurs that we could invest. So sort of the full stack, I would say.
And you did that through your whole time at
Did
Stanford?
it through the whole time in Stanford.
Okay, and then what year did you finish business school?
2012.
Okay, so from 2012, did Karlin Ventures present itself, the opportunity present itself right away?
No. So the funny thing, I was at business school. So a guy who sat next to me, actually two guys, Michael Cagney and Dan Macklin. They are founders of a company called SoFi, Social Finance. I don't know if you guys have seen that company. So they're sitting next to me in business school, and we had this class at Stanford called S356. Don't even ask me what those numbers mean, but basically it's a class where you can actually get credits for thinking about business ideas. So that's like it's like free credits in my mind. So these guys, I thought they were awesome. They came up with an idea. So they were very frustrated with student lending. So they're like, why does a guy who goes to a top school have to pay the same interest rate as a guy who doesn't go to college for student loans? He said there has to be a way to study a person's educational, academic, maybe even work background and offer them sort of tailored interest rates for each individual. So I thought that was a really, really compelling idea. So these two guys who I went to class with, had beers with that same evening. I actually presented to my partner in Innovation Endeavors, telling him that he should actually back these guys. He was like, are you out of your mind? These are two guys from business school who are still in business school and are not working full-time on the idea. But again, long story short, he decided to trust my judgment, and I think we invested in a company at a 6 million valuation, and the last valuation is at 4 billion.
And what company is this?
SoFi, S-O-F-I.
Okay.
So that was how I got to know my current investors. So
you would say they started to listen to you after that?
They did. And I was very fortunate. I was also involved in the diligence process for Uber, the Series A. So that was a very, very successful fund. But the way I got to know my LP, which is the Karlin family, at that point, they didn't have a formal venture capital platform, but they're very interested in supporting the ecosystem. Dr. Michelson, who was a single LP, he's very involved in innovation and supporting entrepreneurs. So as part of the office had a couple of advisors who are actively seeking venture capital investments, obviously at a very small scale. So think of $10,000, $25,000 checks. So they were closely looking at investment in SoFi at that point, and I was kind of the point person on the deal. So I was sort of rallying the troops, getting all the angel investors involved to close the round. So that's how I built a relationship with them. And once they saw SoFi grow from a small company to where it is today, they decided in 2012, they told me to come work for them. They're like, basically we had a quick conversation. What are you doing after school? I'm like, I don't know, I'm probably going to stay with Eric and his fund, pretty happy there. But they're like, why don't you move to LA and come work for us? So that was the gist of the story.
Had you ever been to LA before that?
I've been here a couple of times as a kid. Really liked it. I have very fond memories. This was me, I think, 8. I was here when I was 8. I was back here when I was 12, but that was pretty much it.
So 2012, you moved to Los Angeles.
Yep.
What was that transition like between business school, being in the Valley, and then moving into LA and kind of having to run the ship yourself?
Great for my personal life, because my girlfriend, who's now my wife, was actually just finishing up law school at USC. So we all went on and on about whether she should move up to the Bay or I should move down. She actually moved like 10 boxes from LA up to San Francisco, only to move them back down the very next week. So great for my personal life, and I think the venture ecosystem here has been very welcoming to me. I have friends like Eva, who's here today, who I've been good friends with over time, and I think it's just a great community of people who are very willing to support each other. So,
would you say it's a lot different from how it is up in the Valley?
I think so. I think sort of within the first sort of 4 or 5 months, I got to know a lot of people within the community, which in the Bay would take you forever. So I like it that it's small. I like it that it's growing. There's a lot of excitement, both from people locally as well as people up in the Bay.
So we'll dive into more detail regarding LA and talking about our ecosystem here, but tell us what exactly Karlin is and the industries that you make investments in.
Got it. So we are early stage venture fund. So we call ourselves a seed fund. But everyone asks you the question, what do you mean by seed? There are like 1,000 definitions of what seed is. So the way I would describe it is we look for initial signs of product market fit. So what that means is we invest in companies where they have a working product. So it's hard for us to invest off a business plan. And where we have some semblance of traction, whether that means you're in like 3 pilots with potential customers, whether you have $5,000 in revenue, all that is fine, all that's validation that you have some product market fit. That's when we tend to get involved. There are 3 sectors that we focus on, mainly financial services, fintech. We do a lot of marketplaces, and then we do a lot of enterprise software. So those are the 3 main sectors we focus on. I'd say our typical check size anywhere from $250,000 to $1.5 million.
Were those the 3 industries in 2012?
No.
Okay.
So I came to town, so I made a lot of mistakes as a VC. I think the first mistake I made was I thought I knew everything. So coming to LA, we thought that we could invest in media, we could invest in e-commerce without having the right background. And I looked at a lot of companies. I was very, very fortunate in the media space, found two amazing companies completely by chance, I have to admit this. But since then, sort of we refined our thesis because we realized in order to be investors, you also want to be partners with these companies and you want to add real value, both in terms of the expertise you have, the relationships you bring. So with that in mind, we streamlined our focus to look at three main verticals.
And did you have a lot of experience or knowledge of all three of those verticals?
Somewhat, I would say. So at McKinsey, I used to cover a lot of fintech. So my big clients were like Citibank, RBS, HSBC Bank. So I was very familiar, especially in the personal finance space. And marketplaces back at Innovation Endeavors was what I covered mainly alongside enterprise software. So did stuff like Uber. We invested in Edipar, which was started by the Palantir founders as well. So a lot of that came from my background. So it was self-selection based on what I was comfortable with.
So talking about the three industries that you're in, and even over the course of the last 4 years, things have changed a lot. Tell us a bit about the big trends that you've seen happen or that you see on the horizon that whether you're a first-time founder or an investor should be looking out for.
Got it. So I'll do it by industry. So for fintech or financial services, something I'm super excited about, specifically personal financial services. I feel that if you think back in the day, what TurboTax did for online tax reporting, if you think about what Wealthfront has done for personal investing, I think every sort of subsector within finance is going to move in that direction. No one wants to meet a face-to-face broker or agent to handle your personal finances. I think all of us want to be able to do it online in 15 minutes. So on that vein, we backed a company called Policy Genius, which is one of the first few online insurance brokers in the personal insurance space. So they do life, disability, pet renters insurance. So that's what I see in personal finance. And the other thing, I think underwriting standards or the way people do underwriting is going to be very, very different. So think about one example would be credit card offers. I've been thinking about this for a long time. Why is it a standard offer? If you sign up, say, for a Delta Gold card, why does everyone get 5,000 miles? I mean, if I'm a guy who flies more often than you, why shouldn't I get 10,000 miles instead of 5? So I think sort of that personalization of financial incentives and underwriting standards, I think we've seen sort of an early evolution with people like Lending Club and SoFi, but I think there's still a lot of disruption in that space. So that's personal finance. In marketplaces, I personally am a big fan of marketplaces that bring services that were once unattainable to the masses. So I think that's one of the reasons we backed a company called Laurel and Wolf. So in my life, I love interior design, right? I mean, I love admiring it. Am I a good designer? Obviously not. But I think that's a service that I wish every single person could have. And previously, the way you would do it, it's only the rich or the ultra rich will be able to pay $15,000 to hire a designer to come to their house and pick out furniture for them. But what Laurel and Wolf has done is made this very accessible to everyone. So for $299 or $499, you can get a professional who actually does it for a living to come design your house. So I think for marketplaces, we're looking for, I really want to leverage my position to actually help companies provide these services to the masses. And also we look for sort of boring brick and mortar industries that haven't been disrupted, that have very healthy business models, and try to apply sort of new age marketplace models to them. So that's in the marketplace. And in enterprise software, what I think it's data is prevalent these days, and everyone should have access to it. So previously, how would most managers make decisions? They would actually rely on the business intelligence, business analytics team and call them for reports and say that, hey, how's our sales performing? What are the reasons why we're underperforming? But I think everyone should have this data at their fingertips. So like, for example, we backed a company called Preact, Preact, that's a customer success platform. So now every customer success agent can pull up a simple dashboard that gives him the context on who his customers are, how much are they spending on their platform, what were their last 3 support tickets. So all that I feel is the empowerment of an everyday individual. So I think sort of thinking about these 3 sectors, those are the trends I'm most excited about.
As far as investment criteria goes, are you primarily looking at Los Angeles-based companies, or does location not really matter?
It doesn't quite matter, but I think a big part of it is we want to be helpful and stay involved. I think it's very hard for me to be closely involved with a company, say New York or Boston. So we try to concentrate our investments here, both in Los Angeles as well as San Francisco. San Francisco mainly because sort of the days where I was working for innovation endeavors, I built a good relationship with a lot of fellow investors, and we get a lot of deal flow from there.
And how many deals has Karlin? How many companies has
So
Karlin
we've
backed?
invested in 40 companies over the sort of the last 3.5 to 4 years, so a pace of about 10 to 12 companies a year.
So obviously you have a lot of deal flow, and you're meeting with a lot of entrepreneurs. What are you looking for when someone comes to meet you? Is there a certain priority list that you check, or is it really more intuitive?
I think the first sanity check is whether people can be honest with themselves. I like people to sort of have a realistic understanding of both their market and themselves. I actually like entrepreneurs who come to me and say that, hey, I can do A, B, and C, but I really need help with D, E, and F. And that's what I seldom see. A lot of times I see entrepreneurs trying to sell me the world, but not realize the challenges that stand in front of them. So I think that's one, right? So one, people who can understand themselves and the business they're in well. I think two, obviously we look for people with the right industry background. So I think that's very important. And three, people who we wanna help and work with. I think people who are very passionate about their vision, people who want to change something, not because of the financial incentives that are there, but more because they feel that this is something that could really help people around them. So that's broadly what we look for.
What is your involvement with companies after you make a deal?
So we're very involved. So I tend to err on the side, sort of, I think it stems from my background. So I walked the lonely journey without having a real mentor or people to help me when I was an entrepreneur, and sort of want to give back in that regard. I think that's the most sort of satisfying part of being a VC, at least for me. So I overcommit myself, and again, my team, if they were here, they make fun of me that I sit on 6 boards right now, which is way too much. And then I think I check in with most of my companies, each of the 40 companies, probably every week at least, or maybe every couple of days. So it's a lot of work, but I love it. I think for me as a VC, I think my biggest goal is to help people realize their dreams. So if I can do that, I've succeeded. If I haven't, then I have not.
So we have a couple more questions, then we'll open it up to Q&A. So start thinking about what you want to ask TX. As far as Los Angeles goes, what is your review on what's currently happening in the startup ecosystem and what is coming in the future?
I think it's super, super exciting. I think even when I got here in 2012 to where it is today, I think it's grown so much. I think if you look back, let's say to 2012, one example, there weren't any accelerators in town. I think Launchpad, Amplify, Mucker all got started around the same time in 2012, which sort of sparked a whole new group of entrepreneurs. And I think for a long time, I think Silicon Valley used to overlook LA as an investment hub, but now I've seen a lot of value investors. If you read TechCrunch, a lot of the big investments are into LA companies. So I think that's super exciting. I think if you look at the statistics, I think now we're number 3 in the world for the number of unicorns that we have. So I think that's super exciting. And I think that the final thing I would say is that LA has such a diverse background. So you think about aerospace, we have aerospace engineers. You think of logistics, we have one of the largest ports in the world, Long Beach. If you think about media, you think about e-commerce, we have all these backgrounds. So I think it's sort of a natural playground for marketplaces. And the more I think of it, I'm just so excited about the number of marketplace companies that will come out of LA.
And I think it's also exciting because, you know, it's relatively a new scene in regards to investments, right? I mean, in the Valley, you have 500 VCs, and here, what are there, 50?
Not even.
Not even?
Yeah. Maybe I would say active VCs, probably less than 20.
Do you find that LA companies gravitate towards money from Los Angeles or money from up north?
I think at the early stage, I think it's just, I think for seed investors like myself, it's all about the relationships you have with these entrepreneurs, right? You're taking a bull bet very early on when there's not a lot of proof points. So I think by definition, it involves you getting to know the entrepreneur and a team very well. So I think when entrepreneurs raise their seed round, more often than not, they turn to LA investors. I think once they raise their Series A, B, or C round, I think there's an equal split of entrepreneurs who raise money locally versus entrepreneurs who raise money from VCs outside of LA.
So you've obviously been at both sides of the table,
Yeah.
right? You've had your 70 meetings, you actually raised capital, and now you're the one making investments.
Yeah.
What are common mistakes that you see first-time entrepreneurs or just entrepreneurs in general make when they are fundraising?
Oh, that's a long list. I think VCs. I think that the trouble with VCs is that we want to help everyone, but we just don't have the bandwidth sometimes, and it's very sad. In my opinion, that's very sad. But I think because at least for us, we see about 2,000 pitches every year, so it's very hard for me to discern if I don't know the person whether or not he's good, she's good, or whether the company is good. So I think for me, a lot of it, entrepreneurs try to reach out to VCs cold. I think obviously this has been said so many times, but I think the warmer an introduction you can get, it's always more helpful. I think the second thing is what I always say is to release the agenda. I feel like as a VC, I want to learn more about you. I want to learn more about your business, and every VC wants to learn about something different. So I've seen so many entrepreneurs have this like 7-minute pitch that they've got nailed down. It's probably what I did when I tried to raise money. That's why I could never raise money. I just wanted to deliver my pitch, but not actually answer any of the questions that the VCs had. So I think sort of taking a step back, treat it as a normal conversation. I mean, we're normal people, and I'm a guy who could never raise money for the longest time ever. So I think we're pretty much in the same boat. So just treat us as normal people, have a normal conversation, and I think it usually works out. Is
VC money right for every company?
No, absolutely not.
So what would make an entrepreneur, what would align that route to meet with a VC? Is it really about the valuation and the return? And as an entrepreneur, how can you analyze that to figure out if you do need money, what source is the best place to get capital?
Got it. So I think the way you should think about it is understanding what kind of benefits come with that source of capital, right? So I think if you want to take money from a VC, obviously first you have to have a tech-enabled business. So a business which could benefit from sort of having good technology, a business that could benefit from having good tech partnerships, a business that could be helped with sort of being connected to sort of the biggest names in tech, right? So if that's your business and that's your roadmap, I would say VC is right for you. But if you're sort of a normal business, and those businesses are great, by the way. I think for a lot of VC businesses, you end up giving a lot of your business to the VC. So I would say that if you're a traditional brick and mortar business, there's nothing to be ashamed of. I think you can still build a great company and be respected in your space, but you have to really think about whether what you're building is a VC business or not.
So as far as the future goes, talk to us about what you want to accomplish at Karlin.
I want to give back more and more to the community the more I can. I think we've done a bit of that, but not enough. I think events like these I'm always excited about. So I think we need more people like you, Zhuo, to actually help the community. Sometimes I'm just so focused on my job that I don't take the time to actually help the broader community. I think that's something I want to do. I think the first sort of 3-4 years, we spent a lot of time building our own name. And now I think we're at a point where we have some connections that can be helpful. And we want to sort of use that as to be a resource to the larger community.
Well, I appreciate you for saying that. And I think that it is really, it's a two-way street, right? Because we were speaking about it before, the interview, that the reason that this matters is because normally he is the one saying no to everyone's deal. But in reality, he has a story behind him, and he was in the same seat that you all are in tonight. So, we really appreciate you taking time to share your story. And lastly, before we open up for Q&A, beyond, Karlin, how about for yourself? Do you have any goals, or do you plan on starting another business in your life, or?
I do, to be honest. Like I always dream of being an operator. Again, I don't know whether I'll be a good operator for a couple of reasons. I fall in this weird category. So I consider 3 groups of entrepreneurs, right? One, who are entrepreneurs who have not succeeded and are still very hungry for success. 2, the second group of entrepreneurs who have sold their company for so much money that it doesn't matter what they do, they can take every single risk in the world. I feel, with regards to being an entrepreneur, I feel I'm more of a hoarder these days. Like I fall in that camp where like it was really, really tough for me to make this small amount of money, and I'm just trying to hold on to it. So I think so that being very honest with all of you, I think so that I think my risk profile at this point doesn't make me a good entrepreneur. Maybe that will change one day, but probably not now.
You're still very young, right? So there's no rush.
Yeah, I look young. I'm not that young.
Oh, okay. And how about just the city itself? I mean, are you committed to LA for the next 5 or 10 years?
I am. I think sort of LA has been with me from day one. Sort of almost the first day I started as a proper VC, and it's been super nice to me. So I really feel part of this ecosystem, and hope to continue to be a part of it if my investors will allow me to.
I'm sure they will. Well, I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate you answering the questions. Let's give a big round of applause before Q&A.